Hello, I'm Ricky Church for Flickering Myth, and I have here with me today Sam Maggs, author of Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars, tie into the upcoming Star Wars Jedi Survivor game. So, yeah, hi Sam, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm good. I'm good. All
Great.
right. So, first off, a lot of your background in your career comes from video game writing.
Sure.
One of the most recent things I can think of is like Call of Duty Vanguard and a couple other things in your career. So, Battle Scars must be kind of like a perfect marriage for you with your interest in novel writing and interest in video gaming, and then just Star Wars fandom in general. So, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, it absolutely has been. And I think it's actually one of the reasons that they approached me for this project in the first place is because my day job is writing video games. And I
Mm-hmm.
was obviously a huge fan of Fallen Order when it came out. And I think that having that experience writing for games really allowed me to take parts of Jedi Fallen Order and transpose them into the novel in like an interesting way that felt really true, I hope, to the original game. I've seen a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people say that the fight scenes kind of feel like the game, which is great because I spent a lot of time. Obviously, I played the whole game, I beat it, I loved it. But like
Mm-hmm.
while I was writing the book, I spent a lot of time, the whole time I was writing action scenes, really,
Yeah.
with Cal's Cal's movesets up, videos of Cal's
Mm-hmm.
movesets up on YouTube, so that I could make sure that what I was writing in the book was transposed like as there were I took certain liberties because it's a book and
Mm-hmm.
I was allowed
Yeah.
to do that. I didn't have
Yeah.
a VFX budget, so here and there I added some things, but I wanted for the most part Cal's actions to map one to one onto the game so that when you were reading the book you could feel like, oh, I remember playing that, or I've seen that move, or I can
Yeah.
recognize
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think a lot of my experience game writing really helped with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. There were to your point about like, oh, hoping readers will notice this. So that there were a couple points where it was like, I did the Leo meme of like, oh, I remember that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I
Oh,
think I know
good.
that move.
Great, great, great. Amazing.
Yeah. When it comes to Star Wars obviously has been around for a long time, and it's
Yeah.
been like a huge thing in pop culture, like dominate pop culture for like almost all of its existence.
Yeah.
So is it surreal for you to like come into this and say like I've written a Star Wars novel?
Oh,
And I know
yeah. Oh
you've
my
written a
gosh.
couple other like Star Wars comics and stuff, but so how's that surreal for you as like a fan, and then also of not just writing a Star Wars novel, but a novel tied into a video game?
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, it's like the most exciting thing in the world. I grew up with Star Wars. My parents are huge fans. Being able to tell them about this project was like
Mhm.
huge for me, huge for them, frankly. Things that I wrote going up on Wikipedia. It's like a
Yes.
real career highlight for me because, of course, writing the book is awesome. And to your point, like I am a novelist and I love telling stories and I love character most of all, but like there is something really unique and special about adding to the Star Wars canon. Like that's
Mhm.
gonna outlive me
Yeah.
indefinitely, probably. And so that's like it feels surreal.
Mhm.
It's really exciting to think about. And it was also something that I didn't take very lightly. One of the things that the Lucasfilm team came to me with was the fifth brother. We
Mhm.
knew that we wanted to use an Inquisitor in the book. My editor Tom Holler, who was wonderful, and
Mhm.
I had originally suggested using the Inquisitor that Delilah S. Dawson is writing about in her book that comes out
Oh
in
yeah, yeah.
July.
Mhm.
But Delilah and I were actually writing our books parallel to each other. We were writing them at the same time, and so there wasn't enough information about her
Yeah.
Inquisitor available yet for me to
Mhm.
use. So we went to Lucasfilm. We were kind of like, okay, this isn't going to work. Do you guys have any suggestions? And they brought the fifth brother to us, and we're kind of like, well, this character has been around now. We've seen him in Rebels, we've seen him in Kenobi.
Mhm.
He's popular, he's cool, but we don't know anything about him. We know that he's
Yeah.
angry and doesn't really get along with people and fights really well, but like we don't know where he's from. We don't know his backstory. We don't know his species even. Like we knew
Hmm.
nothing about him. And so they were like, this would be a really cool opportunity for you to flesh that out for
Hmm.
us. You know what I mean? They were like, we want to
Yeah,
know
yeah.
more about him. So maybe you can like take a crack at it. And that was really cool for me. And again, it's something that I don't take lightly because I know that then that touches all these other pieces of media,
Hmm.
and all these other Fifth Brother stories. So yeah, it was cool. Again, it feels like a big deal to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. One of the when the book was announced, like one of the aspects that I was like piqued my interest, other than it just obviously being connected to Jedi,
Yes.
was the fifth brother. Because like you said, we see him in Rebels, we see him in Kenobi, but we don't get to know him much very well. So
Yeah.
when you shift to his perspective in the book, I found like those passages like really interesting and intriguing, just
Thank
expanding
you.
more on his character. Yeah.
Those passages were really fun to write because they let me indulge my best and worst The Last Jedi feelings, which which are like the Jedi are bad, actually. Like I don't like them very much. And so
Yep.
I got to like I got to put Ryan Johnson had some interesting ideas actually into the
Mhm.
book, which is really fun, which again is not to say that I agree with the Sith. Let's be clear
Yes.
about that. The fifth brother takes it too far.
Yeah.
However, he makes some points. He has a
Mhm.
very legitimate reasons to
Yeah.
be angry with the Jedi. And so it was fun, to go from kind of like Cal or Cere, who are very like, we love the Jedi, the light side,
Yeah.
to have that other perspective, which again, all the best bad guys think that they're the good guy.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
and the fifth brother very much thinks that he's the good guy, right? So it was
Yeah.
it was really fun to be able to write that perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's even funnier, like when you say, "Oh, the Jedi might not have been totally great." It's like when you watch the Clone Wars and you see some of the like
This is what I'm saying.
inner politics of what was going on, especially in the later seasons.
Oh
Then
my
it's
God.
like, yeah, you can kind
Yeah.
of see it. Like,
Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
yeah,
They have a lot of issues.
yeah. So, Battle Scars, it also takes place in between like the long time span of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, which
Yes.
is like a time period of like 20 years, and it's only seems kind of like more recently that like Star Wars projects have been delving into that timeline of
Yes.
what else was going on in the galaxy between those two movies. So what
Yeah.
was it like for you to get into that space where the Empire is still like pretty new and the Jedi are pretty much all extinct, and there's just all this stuff, all this change happening in the galaxy. What did you kind of like feel you had like a bit of free reign, or was it intimidating to tackle such a massive gap in Star Wars lore?
Well, this is my favorite time period in Star Wars. I
Mhm.
think it's the most interesting. I think the bad guys are the coolest. I love the Inquisitors. And to your point, like there's a lot of unknown about it. Things aren't established yet. It's really like it's really loose. There's a lot of
Mhm.
potential there. I was lucky with Battle Scars in that it takes place over like essentially a 2 week period,
Mhm.
a couple years after Fallen Order and a couple years before Survivor. So like
Yeah.
there wasn't this big swath for me to cover.
Mhm.
I decided, and like the team decided very early on, that it was a much better call to kind of hone in on just this like one specific mission, one
Mhm.
specific story within this time. Seen some folks commenting on how a lot of other Star Wars novels feel the need to be very like very grandiose with like
Yeah.
their to your point, like the time scale and the things that they cover and the impact that they cover, whereas this book is very It's a very granular, it's very micro as opposed to macro. Those are my
Mhm.
kind of favorite stories. I really like intimate character stories, which is kind of what this is. So I didn't feel that pressure. It was nice to be able to look at a big time period like that and say, like, what does a month look like for
Mhm.
one very specific group of people?
Yeah. Yeah, cool, for sure.
Yeah.
And obviously Fallen Order sees players playing as Cal Kestis. And Battle
Yes.
Scars shows not just his perspective, but the perspectives of the rest of the Mantis crew. How did you explore the mindsets of those characters since, Fallen Order, like I said, we see primarily from Cal,
Yeah.
and now you've opened it up to like what everybody else is feeling, since in Fallen Order we were really just kind of like, they talked to Cal. We never got to see Cal, like their what they were feeling and thinking at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that was really the biggest potential in this book
Mm,
because to your point, Fallen Order, and obviously you've seen the trailers, to a large extent Survivor,
mm,
the games are always going to take place from Cal's point of view for the most part, basically, like
mm,
these two games, right? And so you don't have the opportunity in the games to explore the interiority of any of the other characters. Like you said, it's always filtered through Cal's perspective, what Cal hears, what they decide to say out loud. We don't know what they're thinking ever. And so that was, I mean, even with Cal, to be honest, like we don't get a lot of his interiority
yeah.
in the game.
Hmm.
We know that he's like super earnest, but my question when I started writing this book was like, he's been through so much, like, why is he so
Hmm.
earnest?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
why did his trauma make him this way? And the initial pitch for this book to me from the folks at Lucasfilm and Respawn was that it was just a Cal book, was that we only have a Cal POV. And for me and
Hmm.
Tom, it was really, really important to us that we get like that was kind of the unique value proposition of this
Hmm.
novel, is that this is a thing we're never going to get in a game. You
Yeah.
know, we got the Cere comics a little bit, but like this is really the only place that we could ever do this, that we could ever dig into like, what is Merrin thinking? What does it mean that she lost her sisters and her planet? What does it
Hmm.
mean for Cere that she's trying to sort of rebuild the Jedi, but like not really? What does it mean for Greez that he kind of doesn't really want to be here a lot of the time except for these
Yeah.
people, you
Uh,
know? Getting into that and being able to be like, yeah, Grease is the comic relief, but like there's also a lot going on in there.
hmm.
Um, that was what made this book the most interesting to me, which is not to say that also exploring Cal's interiority wasn't interesting. It was, but like again, this is really the only place where you could see all of those different perspectives. And I think that reading them is going to inform what you see in Survivor in a
Hmm.
really different way than if it had just been Cal's POV.
Hmm. Cool. And you brought up Merrin. Merrin plays a pretty prominent role in Battle Scars, but it's interesting because like she was introduced so late in the game that players didn't get a lot of time to know her as well as they did Cere and Greez. Um, so what was it like to kind of to really like crack her open and explore, like you said, her feelings on Dathomir and losing her sisters and her relationship with Fred. What how did that feel? Was that intimidating at all? Because obviously she, like, even with the limited screen time she had in the game, she became, from what I saw, a pretty favorite character just based
Yeah,
on that.
it was not intimidating. It was incredibly exciting. When I finished Fallen Order, the first thing I did was tweet like, "Who's writing the Merrin book? Let me write the Merrin book." Because I think that the only way that Fallen Order could have been improved is if they had had more Merrin in it. Like I
Yeah.
immediately just, like you said, like many people felt like wanted more of her, wanted to know more about her. Um, Night Sisters are fascinating. We don't know a lot about them. The
Mhm.
idea of having like dark side girly best friends with like most earnest light side dude in the universe is like so interesting, and how
Mhm.
they're like these two childhood trauma doofuses, like how they deal with that in their own ways and how those ways clash with each other. Like that was so fascinating to me. And I just like immediately wanted to know more about her. And I in a lot of ways wanted to be the person who got to like
Yeah.
dive into that about her and like dig through her brain and kind of
Mm.
figure out like the effect that being so far from her planet, having lost her family, and
Mm.
being manipulated by Malakos, and now being
Yeah.
on a ship with like the goody goodies in the universe for a couple of years, is going to do to like a dark side girl, how that's going to affect her. That was the part of the book that came easiest to me, and it was the
Mhm.
part of the book that I was most excited to write, I would say, which I
Yeah.
think comes through probably in the book too. You can
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah, for sure. You calling them doofuses is
They're my little
like
blorbo idiots. Like
yeah.
I love them. You know what I mean?
Like
Yeah.
reading I can definitely like see what the doofus has, just because like they're like you said, they're both so earnest in their own ways, but also like
You know,
naive in others. Like Merrin is so not used to hanging out with people, and Cal is like I love the moment where uh Merrin and Fret like hook up in the engine room,
yeah.
and then Cal, it shifts to Cal's perspective, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Merrin's been in there for a few hours. She must be like
She's
doing
probably
really
having a
well."
nap.
Yeah, and it's like, Cal, come on,
Oh, Cal.
put two and two
Oh,
together.
Cal. Poor
um,
sweet boy.
yeah, and it's funny to that point, like your writing style. I found it had like a great balance of like comedic writing with the more serious like drama that was going on.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. So how did you balance those like the comedy and the drama, like those moment, like the moment I just referenced, and with some of the more serious moments when like they're talking about their goals. Greez is like, I don't really want to be here. Why? I don't want to risk our necks all the
Yeah.
time, and Cere's struggling with her um objectives of like bringing the Jedi back. How did you balance like those the comedy and drama?
Yeah, I mean it's not easy, I would say. But it is my favorite way to write. I have a lot of respect for people who write sort of really serious, grim, dark stuff.
Mhm.
That will never be me. I am of the opinion that the way that humans handle difficult and hard situations in real life is with humor, is oftentimes with dark humor, inappropriate
Mhm.
humor. But you have to, in order to make it through like some of the hardest things, you have to be able to laugh about stuff. And it is a survival mechanism. If you're around people dealing with hard stuff, like that is the reality of how people deal with life. Um, and in my opinion anyways, and so I think it's actually a lot more difficult and more challenging to write about serious topics
Mhm.
with a lens of humor or through that sort of filter, but I think it's more real. And so it was really really important to me, and I think like they knew this when coming to me to write the book, because
Mhm.
that's visible in all of my writing, I think. But
Yeah.
like it was really important to me to do that. I think it was a matter of editorial in a lot of ways, finding that balance, because I think
Mhm.
probably in my earlier drafts, it probably fell too far on the side of it wasn't as balanced. There would be like moments
Yeah.
of humor and then really long moments of like serious
Yeah. Yeah.
interiority where nothing would happen except for the characters would stand around and like think a lot.
Oh,
And so it was all about like finding a way to intersperse it
yeah.
that felt really natural in the final product. And so it was
Yeah.
definitely a challenge. Again, my editor Tom was invaluable in that, but I don't know, I think it's really important. I'm glad it came through. And I
Yeah.
think that's also really visible in the game writing as
Mhm.
well, like the salt scene, like which is a really serious conversation between
Mhm.
Cere and Cal. And Greez is sitting between them
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
2 full minutes salting his food, which is like the funniest thing I've ever seen in a Star Wars like
Yeah.
media. But this conversation that's happening is also very serious. Like, so yeah, I think that's a really big Star Wars
Yeah.
thing too, like
Yeah,
outside
yeah,
of
yeah.
the
It's
game in
Star Wars.
general.
Yeah,
Like,
Star Wars has always had a good balance of comedy and drama. Like even the original movie, like C-3PO
yeah,
and R2-D2 bantering in the middle of the desert, like,
yeah,
and then
totally, right?
few minutes later, they're attacked by Jawas. Like, yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
yeah. Um, yeah. So how was it like? Because it wasn't just like the comedy and the drama style that you kind of adapted to too, but um like how like his point of view he's a little more comedic and loose and light, but then get to someone like you mentioned Greez, he's still got that like sarcastic mindset and when in his POV, but he's a little more serious than the others. So was that difficult to like transition from like one character's mindset to another's in such like a kind of a drastically different way, especially when, like we said, we didn't quite know their mindsets, at least as directly
Yeah.
in the game.
It was a big challenge writing this book. There are 5 POVs in this book.
Mm-hmm.
5,
Mm-hmm.
which is so
Yeah,
many. I
yeah,
did it to myself. Again, me and Tom were the ones who were like, we really need to do this. So I was like really just putting the weight on my own back with this one. But like I it was definitely a big challenge. Um Not so much with a character like Greez or the fifth brother, whose voices
mm-hmm.
are like so distinct
Yeah,
and easy and like different from the other ones, but certainly Cal, Merrin, and Cere, it took some real like
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't really be able to write. I would have to spend a day writing Merrin scenes and like a day writing Cal scenes. I would kind of
Yeah,
have to like separate it out. And
mm-hmm.
something that ended up happening a lot in the editorial process is that scenes that were originally from Merrin's point of view, we would kind of look at and be like, "Oh, I think this would be more interesting if it was actually narrated by Cal." And so
Mm-hmm.
I would rewrite those scenes from Cal's perspective, and then it would be about taking out all the Merrin thoughts and putting in the Cal.
Yeah.
And so at certain points it got really confusing and difficult. But I think it worked out for the best, and I'm really really glad that we did it. But it was definitely a challenge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sorry, one moment. My questions disappeared on me.
That's
Uh,
okay.
all right, there we go. So as a video game writer and a comic writer and a novelist, do you find one genre kind of more difficult than the other to handle, or like what do you find your
Mm,
preference?
they're all difficult. They all have their own like benefits and their own cons. You know what I mean? There's like challenges and benefits to each one. A video game is going to be played by 30 million people. No,
Mhm.
30 million people are never going to read my book. Like, there is just the opportunity in video games to reach such a huge audience that you
Mhm.
don't have in either of these other forms of media. That's
Mhm.
really cool. Downsides of video games, like you and your 300 closest friends all trying to make the same thing at the same time. And also, the story is always going to be subservient to the game because the job of the game is to be fun to play.
Mhm.
And so the story has to serve that. It's changing a little bit now, but games are never really like story first,
Yeah,
it's
yeah. Mhm.
gameplay first, mechanics first, all of these things, especially like a AAA action adventure game. The whole point is that it's an action adventure game. Like,
Yeah.
the story has to fit into that. So you are very much like a cog in a huge machine. Um, and you're limited too, in a comic book, I can tell my artist that I want to make a story about 16 unicorns and they're going to be mad at me, but they're going to draw them. But in video games, I can say I want to
Yeah.
make a story about 16 unicorns and they're going to say, nah, well, we actually only have a rig for a goat. Can your story be about 16 goats? And I'll say, okay. I mean, it's going to be
Mhm.
kind of different, but like, okay. And then the programmer will show up and say, our engine can actually only put one rig on the screen at a time. So can your story about 16 unicorns actually be about one goat? And so these are like the kind of, you have this really
Yeah.
intense box of parameters, which is cool. It makes for interesting problem solving in games, but it also, like, again, it's not really about the story.
Yeah.
Uh Comics, it's about the art. Comics is kind of my favorite thing to make because I think it is the perfect collaboration size when it
Mhm.
comes to team. Novel writing is very isolated. Video game writing, again, is like There's so
Yeah.
many people, so many
Huge.
cooks in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
kitchen. Comics, it's like you, a really talented artist, a great editor, a letterer, a colorist, like
Hmm.
5 to 10 people really at the top of their game, like all bringing their creativity to the same project, trying to tell the same story. It is narrative first. The script typically comes first in comics. If you're like working with a writer and an artist, script always comes first. So like um you have a lot of control as the writer or the creative team if it's you and a artist working on it at the same time. You're not limited by like VFX budgets or that money in that sort of way. You have a lot of freedom, and the medium is still very visual. I love a visual medium. I think
Hmm. Yeah, for
you
sure.
can do things in comics that you can't do in a novel simply because it is a visual medium. So
Hmm.
I love to make comics. Novel writing, on the other hand, is all story. So
Yeah.
it's just me, which is awesome. Also terrifying because I don't have anyone to be like, this sucks. Do you have a better idea? Except for like Tom, poor
Yeah.
Tom on the phone with me at like 2 a.m, in New York City while I'm in LA. But it is also like I have total creative freedom. I mean, obviously I'm working for an IP, so not like total, but like
Hmm.
it's just me, it's my
Yeah.
vision or whatever on the page. And also I'm not limited by anything because there are no visuals. So I can write anything. You're only limited by what you can think about.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But I like to work in IP because I like a box. I like to be constrained in different ways. Like it helps with my problem solving and creative process. Sometimes novel writing is scary because it's like like that's intimidating to me, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
so I think they all have their benefits, they all have their negatives. It's fun to work across genres for that
Hmm.
reason. You can tell different kinds of stories. You can tell a story in a game that you couldn't tell in a novel that you couldn't tell in a comic and vice versa,
Hmm.
or
Yeah,
it works better in one than the other, which I think is cool.
yeah. Um, to your point about like just how different these mediums are. In your career, you've written for big franchises like Star Wars, Call of Duty, Transformers, Captain Marvel. Do you find it intimidating to tackle such huge properties that like have such large and often intense fan bases?
It depends on the project.
Mhm.
Sometimes it depends on like how rabid a fan I am.
Yeah.
Star Wars was incredibly intimidating. Transformers, I didn't know a lot about coming into it, so I was kind
Mhm.
of like, I could do it. Robots, like it was
Yeah.
it was less scary to me because I felt like, oh, I don't have the pressure of this. I don't like. I had to learn a
Yeah.
lot about it. Same with My Little Pony.
Mhm.
I like came into it not knowing a lot about it. I learned a lot about it. But
Yeah.
like Captain Marvel has been my favorite superhero since I was 17 years old.
Yeah. Mhm.
Horrifying. The most intimidating project I've ever worked on because I wanted it so bad
Yeah.
first. And then, like, because I felt the pressure of, like, this is an icon and she's my
Yeah.
hero. Like, and it was same with, like, when Lucasfilm came to me and they were like, hey, do you want to write a Luke Skywalker short story? And I was like, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, because I was like a big Star Wars dork. So, I think it depends for me on like how invested I am in the property when I come to it. My job as an IP writer is to be good at writing anything, whether I'm
Mhm.
or is to be able to like adapt to writing the voice of anything,
Yeah.
regardless of how well versed I am in the property when I come to the project. It's
Yeah.
about being able to learn about it quickly and ingratiate yourself into like those voices in that
Yeah.
story. And then like I love My Little Pony now. I'm like so into Transformers now, and those were great gateways for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, different than being like, can you write Carol Danvers
Mhm.
for me? Anyways,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. And real quick, what's your favorite Star Wars movie and Star Wars character?
Uh, Great question. I'm afraid I'm a Last Jedi stan. It's my favorite, but uh genuinely I would actually say that The Force Awakens is my favorite Star Wars
Mhm.
movie, I think, because I mean, it's just A New Hope, but what if it was a girl? Like that was so, as someone who grew up with Star Wars, like I mean, I think I saw The Force Awakens like 9 times in theaters, and every time Rey
Yeah,
turns on that lightsaber for the first time,
yeah,
I bawl because I'd never seen a
yeah. A
girl
big
hold a
moment.
lightsaber. Like
Yeah.
it was so affecting.
Hmm.
Um and that has stuck with me, and that's you know, and I think Carrie Fisher is a goddess, so it's always
Yeah.
got to be Leia. Always
Hmm.
got to be Leia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. All right. Well, great. Thank you very much for speaking with me. And
Thank
yeah,
you. This is so fun. I had a
yeah,
great time.
yeah. Battle Scars is available now, and it is very good, very fun. You enjoy
Thank you so
Fallen
much,
Order
man.
and looking forward to Survivor, you will like it. So thanks
Thanks,
again very
Ricky.
much, Sam. Great talking to you.
Bye.